And he just mentioned to me that this library wasn't even here when he did his studies here at USC. So USC has been constantly evolving and adding buildings and programs, and I think Mr. Stephen McElhiney likes coming back here so he can see the growth of his alma mater. So Mr. Stephen McElhiney is the president and CEO of EWI Reinsurance Services. And this is a hugely, hugely important company in a hugely important industry in this country. Because without the risk management services of companies like EDI and reinsurance, businesses and governments could face huge losses when the unexpected happen. So companies like EDI play a very important role in preserving, a safety net role sort of, and making it possible for businesses to jump into new things, to take risks, and making it possible for governments to deal with disaster when they happen, whether they be man-made or industry-made. So we're very pleased that he has come to share some of his knowledge gained from his many years of experience in this field, and that he's speaking to us as a class. We think it's very nice that we can bring speakers here that you have a chance to interact with. And later tonight, he will be visiting the Marshall School, where he got his degree, and will also be doing a similar talk, maybe more finance related than the one this morning. So, and we're also hugely delighted that he has agreed to stay and listen to your presentations and provide his comments on what you present to us. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Stephen McElhiney.
Well, good morning, and first of all, that's not me in the picture. I never get to thank you for water. It is a pleasure to be here today. And I thought it'd be helpful, maybe as we start out, if you could just say what countries you're from, and so maybe just go around the room. Starting with you, ma'am. From China, fantastic.
I'm from Taiwan.
Taiwan, very good.
I'm from Taiwan. I'm from China.
China, excellent.
Japanese.
I'm from China.
Okay.
I'm from Taiwan.
Taiwan, okay.
Indonesia.
Indonesia, fantastic. Okay.
United States.
Yes, sir.
Taiwan.
Taiwan. Japan. Okay, very good. So, good representation of the world here, and I know on the faculty of Armenia and some Soviet Union and so forth, and that's really, I think, USC. It's always been an international university, and much more so than when I was here, which, I think one of the best things I got out of being at USC was exposure to international when it wasn't really the big thing in business. People didn't really look towards Asia that very much in business. And it was very helpful, I think, at a young age, at a point in time back in the 80s, that kind of discussion was going on here. Tanya, Wu, and myself were just at the Asian Pacific APBO conference, and we go to that almost every year. And again, that's something that started 27 years ago. And the first year, probably there were a handful of people there. Now it's sold out. And I think I really commend USC for really being on the forefront of the Pacific Rim and opening up the school. Yeah. But I'm going to talk to you a lot about catastrophes today and some of the issues I deal with on a daily basis. I can tell you when I was in school in the 80s, no one really talked much about hurricanes and earthquakes. We obviously knew that LA has earthquake potential, and there was one in the 70s, that sort of thing. But now it's something that's talked about at every level. If you look at the global organizations, United Nations, they have committees on catastrophes. The G7, G8, G20 countries, however you choose to define it, they talk about catastrophic risk. And I would venture to say in your lifetimes that the importance of this topic is going to be probably double what it is now, 20 years from now. And so whatever paths you take, whether it's working in the private sector, the public sector, going back to your respective countries or staying here, these are some very important things to be aware of and really drive the organizations that you work with and what they do and how they perceive risk. I think, and also I'd like to say at the outset that risk is also an exposure, but there's an opportunity there as well. If you really have a good understanding of risk and your company or organization or government NGO organization uses risk effectively and manages it effectively, you can do better in the marketplace. So with that as a background, I want to talk to you about a couple themes, and I know we have some case studies today, and I look forward to your insights. Two very different events that recently happened that were headline events. One, and by the way, feel free to ask questions at any point in time as we go forward. Deepwater Horizon, also called the BP oil spill, but really it's a well called Macondo. So people in the oil and gas field refer to this as the Macondo oil spill. It was something that was very significant on many levels. Really, I think it's a game changer, as President Obama likes to say. The term it's changed the perception of energy development and offshore energy development in the United States and North America. But I guess in the world of energy, just to kind of go through a little bit of background, you have a few different areas where energy development's happening in the United States, and some of these are very much global themes. But this whole thing of shale development, have you heard much about that? Fracking, it's something you've probably seen movies about and a lot of discussion. It's really a way to release natural gas and oil from formations that were either closed out years ago or were just too deep to go after because they weren't economic to go after in the prior technology. Now it is, and so it's really generated an enormous amount of gas and oil for the United States, where we're going to transform from being a net importer of energy to an exporter within like 10 years. And a lot of activity around that in Texas, where I am right now. They're actually building facilities to take U.S. natural gas, liquefy it, and send it overseas to Japan and Asia. So what a difference that is, and that's going to really change a lot of the money flows around the world and the economic side of things. Then offshore, right? As we saw with the BP well, Macondo, increasingly the offshore drilling has been going deeper, going more remote places. I was in Brazil about a year ago, and just I was watching these rigs just every day going out to sea, for a lot of deep water drilling off Brazil. It's very deep, it's very hard to access. Fortunately, there's been no spills, but by its nature, when you're drilling offshore, it's higher risk. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of rigs, but these are floating in the ocean, basically going down and spreading out in all directions to go very deep in the ocean floor to release oil and gas. Then you have, what we call, I guess, in oil and gas, upstream versus downstream. The upstream is the drilling of the oil and gas. The downstream is where you buy it at the gas station, so everything in between. It's brought in, it's refined, it's going through pipelines, going on trains, and so forth. So every direction oil and gas is going in various directions. And then the other thing we talk a lot about is alternative energy, right? So what do we mean by that? Alternative energy, wind power, certainly. Okay, yep. And so there's a lot of activity going on to really maybe have 10 or 20% of the energy in the world coming from alternative means, not just from in the ground, not just fossil fuels. So you look at this thing of what happened with the BP oil spill, where basically too much pressure came up from below in the ocean. It blew out this thing called the blowout preventer, and so gas came up into the rig, exploded, caught fire, people lost their lives, and then a unrelenting spill of oil happened for 30, 60 days. It was a very horrible situation for the environment in every way you look at it. What we're showing here on this slide is that there were some, the U.S. government has certain fines and penalties that were put in place, and I think since then BP has paid over $2 billion in fines. They may have to pay another $10 billion. Another company involved, Transocean's, paid a couple billion in fines. And those fines are used to clean up the oil, right? So the government had all these resources out there trying to clean the spill. The intent is to make the companies pay it back. Then something that also happens, you may not have thought about, if a lot of these companies are publicly traded entities, right? So they're on the stock exchange, and so there's directors and officers involved that have exposure for acts that are done where there's been damages caused. And in the insurance business, we have a product called Directors and Officers Insurance. I don't know if you've ever heard about that, but basically any director that serves on a board really is exposed to being sued for taking acts that cause damage to others or damage to the price of the stock. And so the insurance industry provides coverage for these individuals so they'll serve on boards, right? So as a result of all of this that happened in the BP oil spill, companies like BP, Transocean, Anadarko, their stock prices went down, they were sued. The directors and the CEOs and so forth of these companies were also individually sued because of, you didn't have enough controls in place, how could you let this happen? And the impact of that alone was $500 million that had to be paid out. So, have you, I guess in your classes you probably have talked about the concept of ERM, Enterprise Risk Management. It's a big theme now in finance and business. And what we mean by that is basically there's certain things and certain risks that can happen to a company. Some are insurable, some are not, right? Some are by their nature things that you really can't control too much. But the financial crisis, which we all lived through, you all were there 5 years ago, I think taught us a lot of things. It was very interesting because all these companies that failed, the Wachovia banks, various banking institutions, security firms like Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, they all had risk committees, they all had chief risk officers, they all had systems in place, but still they failed. And really what happened there, and I think the biggest risk we look at ARM is how correlated things are from one to another. So in the financial crisis, the failure of one entity led to the failure of another and another. And so that's a very hard thing to monitor. And so to some extent, when you look at Deepwater Horizon, BP, there was a lot of correlation there as well, right? We had a lot of things go wrong simultaneously that led to a massive failure and damages. And really, I think fundamentally, the companies involved underestimated the potential risk and the potential impact. That certain things could have been done to prevent that entirely. It never should have happened. And so that's a lot of what we do in our business is go back. What's the post-mortem? What did we learn from that incident? What lessons were learned? And oftentimes, it's the accident that, maybe it's a near miss or something that could have been significant we catch early. And that could be just as informative as looking at something where it's an absolute catastrophe. What failure happened in management or controls overlooked or avoided, procedures were they avoided. And I think when you look at something like the BP oil spill, there were many, many procedures and training and drills that were going on, but somehow, when it really was necessary, that they failed. And usually that's a failure of management, right? Because the role of management is to enforce policies, procedures, and safety is a big thing, And the organizations we work with, it's not just using insurance to save money, it's really to help your company survive. Because there are certain events, we call them black swans, that happen, which by their nature, they're very rare in occurrence, but when they do happen, it's game over. If your company cannot survive it. BP was able to survive this just because they're so massive and they have so much money. But they have to look at where they are now, where they could have been had this not happened. It's a huge amount of lost opportunity for them. Yes, ma'am?
I'm just curious, so do you think that they were adequately insured to help them cover these losses? Or in retrospect, could they have been better insured?
They were underinsured for sure. You know, and a lot of it, you know, I guess the word, you know, hubris, right, where they just, some of these major oil companies kind of view, well, what do we need insurance companies for? We're bigger, we have a bigger balance sheet, we'll self-insure a lot of this risk. So a lot of this, they just self-insured. They didn't really lay it off to the industry, and you know, that's another thing. That's a missed opportunity, right? So you know, I think it's a case where they didn't have enough insurance, they didn't have enough, I guess, controls and procedures that were really being followed, and you know, procedural manuals and stuff are great if they're used, right? But a lot of things, when you go in to talk to a company, what are you actually doing? You know, how are you really following this? And, it really all comes down to training the people, right? You want to make sure that the folks that need to make the decision are making the right decisions. We actually follow something that our friend called a debrief model, and so it's actually something patterned after the military, where you know, when you look at it, like they have a military operation, they always come back to the room, and everyone involved, you know, what did we do right, what did we do wrong, and it's also nameless and rankless, so like the admirals and the generals, or you know, if they did something wrong, they're called on it, and that tries to feed back next time so it doesn't happen, you know, and so I think that's something here where, you know, just really having enough processes in place to you know, day after day on the drilling site, you know, what did we do right, what did we do wrong, you know, this gauge wasn't like that. And so I guess one fundamental risk question we have on here is for any organization, and as you move on in life and you know, take on significant roles, you know, there is some event out there that could ruin or cause your organization to fail. Maybe it's an earthquake, you know, maybe it's a financial event. You know, and I think the biggest part of a board or a management team is really at least having awareness of what that is. And not necessarily ensuring it, but just understanding that it could happen. And so we always like to have that conversation when we talk to companies of, you know, what events or a series of events could lead to the failure of your company. So here we are at USC. I mean, what thing could cause USC to come to an end? Well, probably an earthquake, right? And, if you had a 9.0 earthquake happening right under the ground here, there'd be a lot of damage, a lot of buildings that, you know, probably everyone would get out alive, but the buildings themselves would be a mess, right? So that's where insurance comes in. That's where you want to have a way to recover from that. You know, and likewise, you know, it varies by company. You know, for example, if you're a shipping company or a transportation company, you've got the Port of Los Angeles, and all your business is going in and out of there. What happens if something would bring the port down, an earthquake or a terrorist event or something like that? So it's really more than anything having to understand what those risks are, you know, and that's, I think, one of the most important roles for a board and a CEO is to at least understand their risk profile and what they're operating in. And I tell you, it's an amazing fact, but every time there's a major catastrophe, there's a surprise. How did this happen? Thailand, I didn't hear anyone here from Thailand, but the floods, right, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Catastrophic in every sense. Flooding that happened across the board that wasn't anticipated. Dams and dikes that failed and so forth. It caused their economic activity to go down 10% in 1 year. You know, so those are the sorts of questions that you need to ask. And every country I heard as we went around the road, you know, you've got a lot of catastrophic risk exposure there. China, earthquakes, very major earthquakes have happened recently. You go through Southeast Asia, East Asia, typhoons, India, you know, cyclones, flooding. Europe is seeing major increase in flooding and hail, windstorms that are almost hurricane level speed. And so that probably, you know, I think I have a slide that gets into this later, but, you know, what's the cause of all this? And, you know, clearly the climate itself is changing. I think it's fair to say that, you know, the world over the history of time has gone through, warm periods, cold periods, major climate change periods, and we're in one now. There's no question of that we are. You know, what's the impact of man in that? That's, I don't know, there's definitely an impact, but you know, as you look back as recently as 1800, it was a very cold century on Earth. And a lot of that was because from the volcano going off in Indonesia that basically covered the northern hemisphere with ash for decades and really caused the Earth to cool. Back in the time of the Vikings, it was a very warm century. You know, that's when they really started exploring the world. And Greenland was really a green place when they first found it, right? So this is not really a new phenomenon, but you know, clearly we're in one now. And in my view, and I think a lot of people in the industry, when the cutting edge of that change is going to be reflected in things like tornadoes, hailstorms, more significant flooding, and drought. Drought's the other side of it. You're in a big drought. Texas, where I'm from, is in a big drought. Other parts of the country are just drenched in water. So things are changing, and so with that, your risk profile is going up. Some of the other impacts of the BP crisis, which you know, I think is important to mention, because this really transcends events as you look at them. But this issue of reputational damage, right? There's a direct correlation between like some of the company's J.D. Power rating and how they're valued in the stock market and their safety record. It's one thing that's you know, goes into the process of how stocks are priced and companies are evaluated. You know, like the Disney company, they're renowned for having a phenomenal risk management department there. So, you know, I really can't recall anyone having a major accident at Disney in my lifetime. I guess they've had them, but it's a very safe place to go, and people value that. You know, and so it becomes how they're perceived as a safe environment. But then the negative reputational damage is incalculable of what impact does that have? Are there people now that will not go to a BP gas station? Yes, I think it's fair to say there's probably lots and lots of them. No matter what they do, no matter how many commercials they put on, it takes so little time to destroy a reputation and so long to build it back. That's a Warren Buffett saying. And you know, so that's a big part of what we're doing here. You want to keep your organization out of the headlines. You want to be perceived as a safe place to work, to do business with. The other negative thing is having to sell at the wrong time. You know, if you're paying millions of dollars in damages, millions of dollars, and you don't have enough insurance, you're going to have to sell assets probably to raise that money. And you know, that's when you look at the financial crisis, that was a big reason why the stock market kept going down, is because companies were getting what they call margin calls. They were borrowing, hedge funds borrowing money to buy stock. Stocks are going down, so they had to actually sell more stock to get cash to cover that. And so that's why, you know, you kept seeing stocks going down. So you never want to be in a position where you have to liquidate your holdings to finance risk. Management changes. You know, BP got a new CEO within 5 minutes after this happening, and the other companies involved. It seems like that's also what's happened. You can't survive that if you're in a management role. You know, and some of the other impacts, you know, just the interest level in this country to do offshore oil exploration in the Gulf, off of California, off of Florida, it's just gone. No, there's no interest in that anymore, because there's too much fear of a BP happening in Santa Monica Bay, right, or off of Florida. And so that's a changer, right? That's a game changer. You know, and so probably an impact of that is you're going to see more of that offshore drilling going off in places like Brazil, Indonesia, less in the United States. So, you know, this almost as a game changer, you know. You know, and I guess obviously insurance prices went up for everyone in the business, whether you're a good player or a bad player. You know, and I guess, you know, really put a lot of a moratorium on development fundamentally. And I'm sure as you go through the case, you'll go into this in a lot more detail. But so, you know, I guess when you look at this concept of systemic failures I've been talking about, where something across the board is happening, correlated risk, it is very much counterintuitive that it's happening in organizations that have a lot of risk resources involved, right? And BP, invested millions of dollars in risk management, safety, and still had this horrible incident. Buffett, who I think has some great quotes, it's always easier to look back through the rearview mirror in life than looking ahead and see what's on the horizon. And I think if there's one thing that I notice a lot in the insurance industry and the risk industry, we're oftentimes looking back. We're very focused on the event that just happened last year, whether it's a tornado in Oklahoma, reliving the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, where the more important thing is to look ahead and what thing has not happened actually. So like when we look at California for earthquake, it's very easy to look at San Francisco in 1906, that's a recent event, but the San Diego part of the San Andreas Fault hasn't gone off for over 500 years. So looking ahead, that's probably more likely to happen than San Francisco again. And I think that's the biggest role you're going to have in life is finding the time and accessing the resources so you're the best you can look ahead. What's on the horizon? Because I would say that the change you're going to see in your lifetimes and your careers, it's going to be multiples of what I've seen. And it's I guess the sad part of that is if failure means it could be the end of the organization you're with, right? So it's that important to really have an understanding of risk going forward. Shifting gears entirely, we go to the Japanese earthquake, tsunami, nuclear release. We like to say in insurance, it's a triple trigger, right? So three things going off at once. And I guess probably the biggest surprise in that was the intensity of the earthquake itself. The models that were used to look at the fault zone anticipated maybe up to like a 7.0 likely earthquake. It was obviously much higher, and so the model itself failed. And everything was based on that assumption that 7.0 was your worst case scenario, and it wasn't. And how the facility was constructed, the impact of the tsunami that happened afterwards. And I guess what's when you look at an earthquake just at a high level, whether it's in Japan or in Los Angeles, you've got homes, personal exposures, and then you also have commercial exposures, high-rises, USC, and so forth. So, it's really, looking at what can happen to the actual damages to the building itself. And then we also deal with something in commercial insurance called business interruption. So if your business is shut down because of a CAT, you're not going to have revenues coming in, you're going to have expenses going on, and you're going to have an economic loss as well as just the cost of putting the building back up. And that could be multiples of the cost of the building. Tsunami, when you look at Japan itself, flooding and tsunami were not covered under most of the insurance policies in Japan. So it was an optional coverage that not a lot of people really took advantage of. And what's very unique in Japan is the government itself bore a lot of the financial burden from the event. There's various energy pools and earthquake pools being used in Japan that are backstopped by the government. And so, a lot of those losses themselves would spill over to the government to finance. And, fortunately, Japan is a very strong economy, strong, sovereign nation, so they were able to absorb that. But clearly that took money away from other alternative uses, schools and roads and other things. The government would have to take funds to pay for rebuilding that for the I guess, really limitations on the power plant liability itself, and a lot of that, again, spills over to the Japanese government. So I guess, just I'll stop there, when you look at the United States, is this unique to Japan, that they have government involvement in terms of financing risk? And the answer is no. Here in the United States, we have, for terrorism, something called TRIA, that's backstopped by the federal government to subsidize up to like 85% of terrorism losses that in a major event. You know, so after like 9/11, the government put forward a lot of money. That's going forward ever since 9/11. We have like a Texas wind pool association that's in place to support coastal risk in Texas if there's a major hurricane. And there's a lot of things in life and in business are not insurable because